Hello, Pēteris. Thank you so much for joining us here at Hashed. I would like to start by introducing you to our global audience. So could you just tell us some of the roles that you're currently involved in at the European Commission?
I'm head of unit for digital innovation and blockchain, which in addition to blockchain obviously also includes the Startup EU projects and also Innovation Radar, coordination of ICT standards, innovation procurement, and access to finance for startups and scale-ups. And I'm also co-chair of the FinTech Task Force, sharing with my colleagues from financial markets the digital single market perspective to enabling FinTech.
So that sounds mouthful, actually. So what are some of the important agendas that you're trying to pursue utilizing your roles at the EC?
Well, we're implementing blockchain, utilizing the partnership with 30 European countries, building a European blockchain services infrastructure, already starting to roll out this year in RegTech, regulatory reporting, and certification of audit documents, with self-sovereign identity and certification of individual diplomas coming afterwards. We do that together with the member states, you can say, in a regulatory sandbox. So we're also learning while we're seeing if we find any regulatory barriers or if there are any places where there would be needed legal clarity or a pro-innovation initiative. Also in Startup Europe and the access to finance, we're launching vehicles like an artificial intelligence blockchain investment fund and also an investment fund for helping small and medium enterprises to digitalize. And that's a few of the things.
And you've mentioned some of the regulatory obstacles that you are trying to ease out for these new enterprises. Could you give us some specific examples and how you've dealt with them?
Well, up until now, we've been hesitant to rush in with any regulation. First of all, we try to be technology neutral and to be future-proofed with our regulation. As we don't have a regulation on servers or a regulation on transistors, we don't think there needs to be a regulation on blockchain. That said, some of the inputs from the community, for example, the latest EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum working group's paper on legal aspects of blockchain and smart contracts indicates that some work might be needed in the area of tokens and smart contracts. But again, if they were to be approached, and this will be a political decision down the line, they should be approached in such a way that these decentralized tools could be used on future technologies, and you also don't lock people into blockchain or distributed ledger technologies or a narrow definition of one of the two or three.
Understood. You've mentioned a lot of great initiatives, and when you try to look at the EU's approach to blockchain, I noticed that there are a lot of emphasis that are being placed on the public good, and such as identity, health data, data management, data sharing. What is the EU's stance on businesses that utilize blockchain? And what are some of the policy angles that you try to go for in supporting that?
Well, one of the things was that I mentioned the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. Again, we don't want to try to squeeze in the market or squeeze the market. We want to let the free market and the creativity and the innovation flourish. But at the same time, we think that a state public service infrastructure can also be a launch pad for private initiatives. Historically, we see things like the internet, for example, which we all utilize now, and which has been the basis for a boom of e-commerce. So if we talk about this area, we thought that our intervention should be on public services, also RegTech, which helps those who are doing the reporting, whether they're banks or eventually those who are some way regulated by environmental legislation. But I do have to underline that the European Blockchain Partnership Declaration has also an article foreseeing a public-private partnership. So on the basis of the same infrastructure, which is shared now by 30 countries, we can do something together with the private stakeholders. This will be probably a bottom-up proposition coming either from member states with stakeholders or stakeholders to us and the member states. So we'll have to see what the first use case would be. The first use cases I already mentioned, the public service ones, are launching this year, at the end of this year. We'll have a second set of use cases which will be approved, which might still be the public service ones, but I expect the collaboration with the private sector to come in the near future, and at the same time with our thinking about the regulatory framework, not having rushed in to regulate yet, and looking to see whether there are interventions needed in the future. It has also been with the idea to let the creativity of the private sector and innovation flourish.
I think it's really important for us to remember that there needs to be a cooperative model between the public and the private, as you've mentioned. And I think it's really important for the uptake of the industry. And I know that there is the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Application as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about the initiatives behind that movement?
That was an idea, as I mentioned. We organized with the member states this European blockchain partnership, but then more and more people from the private sector and the private sector globally were saying to us, well, how will you interact other than sporadically and punctually with individual stakeholders with the private sector? And we, with some of the interested parties, brought together a meeting, my commissioner, Maria Gabriel, and had a roundtable of businesses interested in blockchain, primarily from Europe and North America, though from the very beginning there were Asian companies, and we very much would be very happy to see Korean companies as well as country companies elsewhere in Asia take part. There's a couple of Japanese companies and I think at least one Chinese company already. So this is something that also on this trip, and one of the reasons why I've come too late, I have to say, my first trip to Korea, so it's too late. I should have probably been here long ago with all the dynamic things going on in this country, is to encourage the private stakeholders as well as our counterparts in the government to collaborate. And really the idea is a little bit to give a stakeholder's voice at the global level, whether you're talking with us at the European Commission, with the German government, with the Canadian government, with Australians, with the US, with your own government here in Korea, with the Japanese government, that this would be something and a very flexible and inclusive approach. So again, the message is very much, we'd be very glad to see the Asian stakeholders coming in and even taking a leadership role in the next board of directors elections, and proposing themselves to be among the leaders.
Great. Well, we'll try to make sure to follow up with that.
Great.
I want to switch gears, and instead of just talking about blockchain, I want to have a little bit of conversation about cryptocurrency.
Gotcha.
The EU is not exactly hostile, but they're not 100% supportive of cryptocurrency either. And I think it's because there are inherent risks associated with it. So from the European Commission's perspective, or the regulator's perspective, how can you balance innovation and also responsibility and accountability in facing cryptocurrencies?
Well, I mentioned this FinTech task force that I'm co-chair of, and we had a FinTech action plan that was adopted and that has produced, among other things, a FinTech lab, this European blockchain initiative that I've been talking about, a regulation on crowdfunding, which is very much meant at enabling crowdfunding, and it also has a section on, as we kind of officially, formally call them, crypto assets, because the reading of the European Central Bank was that none of them function like a currency right now, up until now. So you see in the text there that, as you mentioned, the risks are there, but also that very much the positive benefits that could be accrued by raising finance more easily for small and medium enterprises, also for innovative initiatives by larger enterprises, are there. And we are looking, hopefully, from our side to help in shaping the crypto assets, the market, in a way that it can bring perhaps better access to finance, more liquidity. That said, we have taken a relatively neutral position, you could say, about specific crypto assets like Bitcoin, not trying to, which would be, to my mind, not something feasible, prohibit it, for instance, but on the other hand, it would be difficult to endorse it because the only currency of the euro area is the euro. And we have all kinds of assets and commodities, and crypto assets, I think, have their place there. But we've been trying to take an approach that's not heavy-handed and not trying to do things that are not feasible, but at the same time, not encouraging risk-taking or speculation, which at least part of the market in cryptocurrencies has been.
Great. And I think in being able to have a regulatory framework that could work not only within the EU level, but globally, I think it's really important to have either a legal taxonomy at least harmonized. So you've mentioned that the EU looks at it as crypto assets. There are some jurisdictions that look at it as virtual assets, digital assets, and there are a lot of variances that exist. How would you inspire convergence? And I know that Cambridge recently published a regulatory landscape study, and in which they proposed that harmonization. Do you have any opinion on that?
Well, we have a couple of models that are already within the European Union and the European Economic Area, in Malta, in France, in Liechtenstein, which is the EEA, which is our larger group of countries, which are also in the European Blockchain Partnership. Also, the report of the European Securities and Markets Authority proposes that there could be an EU-level framework, or discusses it in their report. So this is again being looked at. There's analysis going on. Our financial markets colleagues have a study going on the security tokens, or tokens as securities, as well as in the payments area. And then we have this report on the legal aspects of blockchain, including smart contracts and what we consider to be utility tokens or consumer tokens. And then there's another study with our financial markets colleagues, this is all coordinated, also on these utility tokens. So you would see, which is public, that Vice President Dombrovskis, who's now an executive vice president in the next commission, has as one of the tasks to look at the crypto assets, and including in this the stable coins. So I mean, there will be a political decision at a point. Does this need a new framework? But it is very much the subject of analysis. And as I say, obviously, why wanting to protect the investor and the consumer as well as they are today, the spirit is a pro-innovation one, and to try to take the benefits from these technology advances, but also making sure that it's not the route to a failure of consumer confidence because of some, failure in an asset.
And I think you're really right to touch on the consumer protection aspect, because I think that's one of the major concerns. And I think to be able to protect them, then we also need to have legal certainty around the regime. And Pēteris, I know that you also have a legal background. So what are some of the nuanced or even new legal challenges that the blockchain brings, and how would you recommend to deal with them?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'd say because it's a new technology, this is also the technology neutral approach, doesn't mean it changes everything.
Yep.
So fraud is fraud, a lack of transparency or market manipulation is market manipulation. These kinds of things can be applied investor protection, the same with consumer protection if the thing is, let's say, promising something and then is defective or is something else. These same principles need to be applied. To a great extent, the existing instruments probably fit, may require adjustments. I mentioned the study that the colleagues are undertaking in financial markets in relation to instruments like MiFID and the prospectus. regulation. So this is being looked at on the side of the things that are the utility consumer tokens. We see great opportunities, especially for running decentralized systems with native tokens, for instance, managing the data that's coming from the Internet of Things and linking it to the processing and analytic capabilities of artificial intelligence, implementing the management of the data according to the citizens, the consumers' wishes, whether this is GDPR for us in our jurisdiction, the California privacy law there, other laws in other jurisdiction. But then getting to what can be different, as I said, as a technology as such, blockchain or DLT are not the last technology, so we shouldn't, how to say, lock ourselves into that as a technological horizon, but probably the decentralizing element. And then this, at least for us, we see it as a continuum. Obviously, something that's in the hands of one or two players is relatively centralized. Something that is like Bitcoin or Ethereum is very decentralized, and some other models. But in between, for instance, this European blockchain partnership will start with nodes in the 30 countries at the European Commission. Possibly at the European Court of Auditors, who are also participating. This eventually in the future, I mean, it will be a political decision, the member states nest together, could go to the municipal and the regional level. So actually for cross-border regulatory public service cooperation, very decentralized, but citizens will be using the services and receiving benefits and services, but they won't be validating, controlling the system. This will be a classic public service model, but again, a very multi-level governance and very distributed. So this is also different. This is why I say this project then of the European blockchain services infrastructure is like a regulatory sandbox, and we're learning while we're doing, and we're seeing where we don't need perhaps a new regulatory framework because we apply time-tested principles to the new technology. But when you move into the very decentralized part of it, which we also want to encourage, we see this as something that's innovative, that can have benefits for the economy, for the citizens, and also globally. But on the other hand, how do you balance this with investor protection, consumer protection? Not a greater level. It's not a reason that we need to have greater strictness that we've had up until now, because at least we're relatively, I think, happy with the model that's in the European Union. But ensuring that if there is a failure, that it's not simply the answer, no one is responsible. Because if we also look to the future and we want take-up, you're not going to have take-up by the common citizen and probably the mainline industries, never mind going to ones that are very sensitive like health, energy, things to do with security. If the answer is, if there's a data breach, instead of reporting, people will just have their hands up and say that no one's responsible. It's not impossible. It is a little bit of an intellectual exercise, and again, we haven't rushed in. I mean, we've been aware of and engaging with blockchain and fintech since around 2013, so not perhaps at the very beginning. Some colleagues noticed Bitcoin perhaps right away, but when we started really having some papers out and in-depth discussions, it was about that time, so some time back. And there has not been a rush, except for, as I mentioned, the crowdfunding regulation, which was meant to enable these kinds of platforms to rush in and just do something. And then again, as I always underline, I mean, our commissioners are the political level. We have a new set of commissioners coming in. We're in hearings right now. We have a new president. So it'll be their decision as well whether we move. But you do see some indications in their mission letters, most of all positive for the commissioner designate that I would work for, Sylvie Goulart. And for Vice President Vestager, you see both the opportunities of the digital economy and blockchain specifically as an emerging technology that should be supported.
Wow. So I guess you are so globally connected and at the vanguard of the industry almost. What do you anticipate that the next 10 years would look like? And what are some of the ideal outcomes that you personally would like to see?
this is dangerous to be predicting the future. I think we're very optimistic about the application of blockchain to areas like supply chain, intellectual property protection, anti-counterfeiting. Maybe a little bit more work to be done, but really perhaps implementing the citizens, the consumers' right to be controlling their data. This is coming up, I think, including from your CEO at Hashed and several of the other speakers. We also see this. This is where we see the tokens and the smart contracts playing a role and having a more decentralized data economy than the platform economy that we have now. Again, if this will be controlled by every single citizen in a completely decentralized format, or at least a more competitive situation than we have now, that's very difficult to say. I would guess something between the two more likely, but ideally not controlled by one or two players and everybody just, how to say, pouring their data in. I think you will probably see some central bank digital currencies. I think complementing them, some private ones, especially for things perhaps like remittances. You have cases where you really do have a very slow process, and I know some of our national politicians are trying to push the commercial banking sector as well to perhaps offer a more technological, a more seamless service. I mean, but of course then it's up to the private sector. So this is a case where there could be some, I think, very positive disruption. And this is now going out more on a limb, but I mean, I think the blockchain really could be a fundamental, if not the fundamental layer of the next generation internet, a more decentralized internet, one that is working more controlled by the citizens, controlled by many actors in the society, merging together a lot with artificial intelligence, IoT, decentralized big data, the cloud, obviously, and ideally, again, in a way that is dispersed so that the creativity of not just, let's say, individual citizens in a developed country or countries, but really globally is allowed to flourish. And that would be the ideal, and hopefully we're going in that direction.
Well, I completely am inspired by that vision as well, and that's part of the reason why I'm in the industry, because I think it allows on an individual level to be more empowered than we have been previously before. So hopefully that is the future we're headed. So I would like to end today's interview with you by just thanking you. And as part of the signature move at Hashed, this is the brand that we do. Okay. So I was wondering if you could do it with me to say thank you.
Am I doing it correctly?
So yeah, facing the other way.
The other way. Okay. There we go.
Okay, so Hashed.
Glad to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.